Welcome to part 2 of the Battle of Tobruk on Let's Play Battlefield 1942. I've walked around the side, tried to sneak toward the enemy's main base. You can see an empty tank icon there at the main base. That is an empty artillery piece, which has the same icon as the tanks. That tends to indicate that there's no one here. So I've got a chance to steal their primary base out from underneath them. This basically functions like an uncapturable base in the way that it's used by the Allies. However, it can be captured, so when it does get captured, they pretty much all freak out. The artillery spawns back here, as well as a Jeep, an APC, and 2 tanks, 1 light tank and the only 1 heavy tank that the British get. It's not useful to the Germans initially because everyone has to die before they can respawn in back there, plus all of those vehicles aren't going to spawn in at that base until we've destroyed them on the field. The one really useful thing about taking that base is that it really disorients the British. They want to recapture it. Often in their team chat that only the British side can see, they start flipping out, ordering everybody to go back there and recapture it, saying they're going to lose. On the other hand, they're still going to have to deal with all the German attacks that are going to be primarily coming from the west on the first row and the second row. So they've got a 2-front war potentially. Often, if the British are pretty well organized, they'll hold the line in the first and second row. They'll send maybe 1 or 2 people back and recapture their primary base before the Germans have a chance to start spawning in there. A lot of German infantry are spawning in as anti-tank. You can see all those bazooka shots flying around everywhere. That's very common on this map, obviously. This is an extremely tank-heavy map, so if you're playing as infantry, often it'll seem like you're kind of left out in the cold. You're very vulnerable. The plus side is when you're playing as a medic on this map is that so many people are spawning in as anti-tank as opposed to medic and assault, that there are fewer guys with machine guns to worry about. You can really start picking off those enemy infantry. Also, there's a lot of snipers and engineers. A lot of people who want to play driving tanks, they'll spawn in on the British side as engineers. Those guys are easily shot up with the medic's machine gun, and the snipers, as usual, are generally pretty worthless. It seems the British have already recaptured the British primary base, their back base on the far east side. So it was a good attempt, but didn't quite work out. The Germans didn't really spawn in there and reinforce it. And the Germans now have no spawns other than their uncapturable base. And we just got one. That's where it's an advantage to have at least doing a good job at the beginning. We had different areas where German infantry were running about. So we had different opportunities to counterattack and try to solidify a different base. At this point, just looking at the radar, you can tell right away, no German tanks around. Too many Germans were spawning in as infantry at the various flags that we captured, which meant that there was no one to bring up the tanks from our main base. So I think if I get killed here, I'm going to have to spawn at the main and bring up a tank. And of course, now we've got no spawn, so we'd have to do that anyway. That guy did what a lot of people did. When their tanks got damaged too much, they jump out. They don't want to be blown up inside the tank. But that opened up the opportunity for me to steal the tank, and let's see if we can do anything with it. Not too much energy, so if I come up against an enemy tank, I'm pretty much out of luck. But if I don't, being in the tank, even with a little bit of health, gives you a huge advantage over any of the enemy infantry. I think someone's chasing me at the moment. I saw a tank shell exploding around, so I'm going to roll over to this repair pad at the British main base. It still takes a while to heal up the tank, so it can be a little tricky. Yeah, the guy named the Professor with his M10, that's the one heavy tank for the British, launched one really good, well-aimed tank shot in there and was able to kill me while I was repairing. Noting on the radar, 3 different German tanks. It looks like having no flags to spawn in really encouraged people to spawn at the main base and bring up those tanks again. And we've managed to capture a couple flags in the front row, so if we can push this along, we may be in really good shape. Once again, we've captured the entire front row. The British have the rest of the flags, and if we can keep up the pressure on them, keep bringing up those tanks, and if the British fail as they've currently done, on the radar I see an empty tank icon at one of the second row flags. They really need to keep those tanks occupied and being used against the enemy if they're going to hold parity on the number of tanks. The Germans have a whole bunch of tanks that spawn at their uncapturable, and the British can only make that up by making use of all the tanks that spawn at their flags. One thing I like to do, if at all possible, is to flank the second row from the north. Unfortunately, the British are doing a good job guarding as opposed to just throwing their tanks into a counterattack. They're actually making a good effort here to patrol the second row, the second row of tanks here on that sandy area in front of those flags. That's making it really difficult to try to make any kind of a play toward the second row. And just in general, that's a good strategy for the British on this map. And it seems like the Professor there in the M10 heavy tank is doing a really professional job of the British role on this map. The British role is to use the tanks to just kind of float around in the middle of the flags, just have the ability to attack different flags, just switch one after another. Don't try to push too much on a flag. Allow the British infantry to retake and neutralize the flags, and just stay mobile. If you do that, there's a good chance that if you play as an engineer, for instance, you can swoop in, do some attacks, and then when you take damage, you can quickly leave, repair your tank, and then come back for some more, and keep your tank alive consistently throughout the round. The Germans, on the other hand, have a huge incentive to just keep up the pressure because they need to keep at least some kind of beachhead along these flags. They don't want to get stuck having to spawn in at the main base over and over again. This flag, too, has a pretty decent-sized capture radius. It's pretty easy to flank around and neutralize it while you remain unseen while still advancing on the flag. And here nobody's left, so it should be a pretty easy capture. Now, there's been a movement toward the British main base. Someone snuck around in there and captured it. So now we're in a reversal situation where the British have the front row and the Germans have the other flags. That's a really bad position for the British to be in. Only one British tank spawns at any of the front row flags. There's a British sniper over there. it's really unfair. I mean, the medic machine gun has good accuracy. You can have decent accuracy even while you're moving. And at medium range, those snipers just don't stand a chance. Maybe they can get one lucky shot off, but that'll only do a good deal of damage and not kill you if they don't hit you in the head. Stay tuned for part 3 of Tobruk.